My pleasure.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the series we've called Coffee with the Legislators, but we just ran out of coffee in the back, so good to see another great crowd, and once we're up and running, I'll get the next pot of coffee going. My name is Carter Fong, and I'm the Executive Director at the Dickinson Area Chamber of Commerce. We aim to connect business and community with our elected and appointed officials because a well-informed public is in everyone's best interest. As we begin, we want to thank our hosts at the Dickinson Area Public Library, along with our sponsors for the day, including Baker Boy and Consolidated. They make it possible for us to provide refreshments. Please help yourselves. Also, Southwest Water originally had the claim for sponsorship for this date, but guest speaker in March will be the topic of water. We would gladly take a water question today if you have one, but coming up, Southwest Water, another sponsor in the series. We welcome any member of the media who may be present as well. To our audience, please note that today's event will be recorded and rebroadcast on Consolidated Channel 18. As you do so, we would request that you would silence your cell phone at this time. Thank you. As Dickinson's population has grown, so has this series. While District 37 is entirely within city limits, nearly half the population of District 36 now resides in Dickinson as well, while District 39 covers the western edge of Dickinson to the Montana and South Dakota borders. Our elected and appointed leaders have constituents elsewhere, but they've chosen to be here today, and we're grateful for that. Today's event features Representative Mike Lefor of District 37, and a few of you in the audience also would have perfect attendance, 3 for 3 thus far. Rich Warner, do we have certificates for perfect attendance? We need to work on that, okay? All right. Okay. We are also, our special guest today is Jan Murtha, an attorney in Dickinson and the Executive Director of the North Dakota Retirement and Investment Office. Among our topics today will be the Legacy Fund. Representative Gary Kreidt of District 36 intended to be here but is out due to illness, and soon we'll have Representative Lefor go in his place with his presentation. Do we have District 39 represented today? Okay.
Sorry, District 39 is caught up in pipeline.
Okay.
We have to stay and work overtime.
Okay. So you'll hear from Mike Lefor and Jan Murtha today, and then we open it up to questions and comments from the public. We would cap questions at 3 minutes. We'll come back to that point in our second hour. We will wrap up by noon. At this time, we would ask Representative Mike Lefor to please rejoin us. Thank you.
You got that PowerPoint?
I will.
Thank you, Carter. To start with, we'll go over the Legacy Fund. I think that Representative Kreidt was going to do that, so I'm subbing. To give a history of what the Legacy Fund has done since its creation and what we're looking at doing as far as the spending portion of it is. Do I just clap my hand or snap my fingers or what? Okay.
Your way through this. Let's try it that way.
Okay. So the Legacy Fund, how does it grow? Well, the voters voted, I think, in 2009 or 2011, somewhere in that area, to set aside 30% of the Legacy Fund earnings. And 30% of the oil gross production tax and the oil extraction tax, the two taxes that oil has. So when the price of a barrel of oil is $70 per barrel, the monthly deposit to the Legacy Fund is approximately, I think that's $70 million, not $70,000. And in the past few years, obviously with the price of oil getting to be very high, those Legacy Fund dollars have been flowing in. The other growth comes from the fund being invested in the stock market. So that has taken a hit in the last 12 months or so. It was growing very, very rapidly. And I'll tell you that with Ms. Murtha here in the crowd, that gives me a lot more confidence because she knows a lot more about this than I do. But at the end of the day, it's been something that the citizens of North Dakota wisely put away for a rainy day, allowing us to grow without utilizing the funds, without spending the dollars. So next one is, oops. Okay. And so what's happening is, I'll just read the bullet points and then I'll explain it. The earnings are generated from the legacy fund during the 2 years of the biennium. So in other words, what we've started to do, the first couple bienniums where we could utilize the dollars of the legacy fund go into the general fund. But in the 21 session, we changed it through House Bill 1380, called the legacy streams. And the idea is that we're going to wait until those dollars accumulate in cash. So that when I was first elected to the legislature, that blew me away. How many states in the country do you think will hold on to their money until you have it there in cash to pay for the bills? That's phenomenal. Those are some things that Senator Warden or many others did for over the years is in a very conservative approach to budgeting. So when you talk about expenditures, they'll be there in the dollars. So the oil buckets are there in dollars to be spent for the next biennium. And now with House Bill 1380 last session, that has the same component. So, and I'll tell you, I'll go through the formula of that in just a minute. But the earnings are generated the biennium before they're appropriated, therefore the cash is on hand. The earnings come from interest, dividends, and realized gains. The estimated earnings during this biennium is $568 million. It was projected to be much higher than that until we took some pretty significant hits in the stock market. And so the history of the legacy earnings, the total earnings in 15 to 17 were $400 million, 17 to 19, $455 million, and 19 to 21, the earnings were $865 million. So you see that number has come down significantly, but you hope that always comes back, and that's a function of the stock market. In addition to that, in House Bill 1425 in the 21 session, the legislature allocated 20% of the principal of the legacy fund to be invested in North Dakota. And that was as a result, listening to the people or investing in foreign countries and things like that. It's our money, so let's invest it here. And so that is still getting up and running with large amount of dollars. You can imagine how long that takes. But those dollars were used in the general fund in those biennia, as that's where the people intended it for it to go. But we changed some things when we passed the legacy streams in the 21 session, so the dollars are accumulating and will be, so we're budgeting with cash on hand. This is to be the first biennium we did that. And so the state we had to deal with revenue shortfalls in 15, 17, and 19, 21. So if you recall, the price of a barrel of oil went down tremendously. And in the 17th session, there's a lot of stress because of the cuts that we had to make to the budget to balance the budget. We're constitutionally obligated to balance the budget every biennium, which is something that very few states have. So we're blessed to live in this state. Okay, so percent of market value. This was in House Bill 1380 last session. What happens in building this formula of how we're going to expend the dollars, you add up the last 5 years of the legacy fund balance as of June 30th. And you see the balance going up 5.6, 6.1, 7.0, 8.1, and it went down to 7.9. So if you add that all up, it's $35.7 billion. So you're taking the 5-year total, adding it up, and then this is really sensitive. But
Want me to drive?
yeah, why don't you drive? Thank you. There we go. Okay, so what the Legacy Streams Bill did was take the total of 5 years of June 30 balance for a $7.1 billion average. So that is a 2-year 2 years average. So next slide. So again, staying on the same bill, we created a formula that we voted to be able to spend 3.5% of the average balance to be for spending streams. So we took 3.5% of the 7.1 million times, or 7.1 billion, I should say, times 2 years equals $497 million. So those are legacy streams that are allocated. And then it'll go on to another side. So involved in that, we spent about $650 million on water. We bonded for that and taken some big projects out of the equation. There's still a lot of big projects out there. But what that did was remove some of the big projects so that other entities like Southwest Water might be able to get more dollars allocated. So 497 is in the streams this session. The cash has been accumulated because of House Bill 1380, and now we can allocate it. And in that, $102 million is for the bond payment for the water projects, $48 million for the PERS employment system, which I'm an advocate of getting that where it needs to be. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you take the earnings estimate, $568 million, minus the percent of market value formula that we put together, that leaves $71.9 million left over. The first stream on the over, how do I explain this? The first stream that's over the allotted $497 million is $102 million for that bond payment, to have one payment in reserve. And then it goes on to money that goes back to legacy fund principal and things like that. So we're trying to be as conservative as we can with that total amount there. Okay, so as I was saying, the Legacy Sinking and Interest Fund, $150 million of that, 101.8 goes to making that bond payment, and the PERS retirement system, $48.2 million. Highway Tax Distribution Fund, $60 million, and that is the one, Rich, that goes to the cities and counties as well?
Yes.
Okay, so 63% I think stays with the state, and the Tax Distribution Fund, that's for the roads and so forth, that's shared with cities, counties, and so forth, townships. Tax relief, it was $50 million. We left that, okay, is that going to be income tax relief? Is it going to be property tax relief? We just left that in that methodology. Clean Sustainable Energy Fund is a fund that has has done a lot of good things in North Dakota already. I will say that part of this, if you look at the coal plant that was purchased by Rainbow Energy, that would not have been possible, not with this, without House Bill 1425. We talked about 20% of the funds being invested in North Dakota. And the Bank of North Dakota utilized those funds to help that entity buy the coal plant, which was them closing that coal plant. I can't even imagine what they were thinking, because that's several hundred miles of electric transmission, and coal is a big percentage of our electricity. So a North Dakota entity controls that electricity. So we're joking the other day about Minnesota just having a shutoff valve and just keeping it in Fargo and keeping it in North Dakota. But joking aside, that's a very big asset for North Dakota going forward. Research and innovation, unappropriated dollars, $177 million. So that's the blueprint from 2 years ago. Now, in the Legacy Streams bill that I authored for this time, separates the $150 million into the first buck. The first stream is $101.8 million. The next stream puts $70 million toward the PERS main system, because we've got a $1.8 billion deficit in that fund. So some of those things remain the same, but I've been working very hard with some agriculture leaders in the House and the Senate about animal agriculture. We had a press conference this week. I could talk about that a little bit later. Next slide. Okay, so the amount above the percent of market value would go into the stream for the backup bond fund, so that if for some reason we didn't have the money to make the bond payment, that's where this would come from. Legacy fund principal, so you see that there's not enough dollars to go back into that at this particular point in time. But the percent of market value is a conservative approach to how we allocate dollars. We don't, it's not necessarily, hey, we're just going to spend everything. So, next. The end. Okay. I can't explain that one. But any questions on the legacy fund or legacy fund earnings? Yes, sir.
So, on one of the slides, Richard Hagan, Medora, on one of the slides it indicated towards tax relief 50 million stream. Can you identify what does that mean exactly? Can you break that down?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Right now, we're talking at Senate leadership, House leadership, and our caucuses are talking about property tax reduction or income tax reduction or a combination of the two. Some of the things that we're talking about, so the 50 million in the current streams bill, it's 200. But again, that has to pass. So this is passed already. So the comments that I've been hearing about property tax, there's different ones. Senator Shively from Mott, who was here last week, has a tremendous amount of experience in education. He's advocating for the state lowering the mills from 60 to 30. So that would be a significant property tax reduction. In addition to that, we've had some that have been discussing targeting the property tax reduction a little bit more, expanding the homestead tax credit to those that are a certain age. And we kind of have to laugh because we're all old in there, and so we talking about just protecting ourselves, but that's just a joke. So, but is it 65 years old? Is it 60 years old? Is it for homestead tax credit? How do we target that relief a little bit more, and then it can't be backfilled? Income tax, the governor's proposed a 1.5% flat tax. That would be at a cost of $566 million, and included in that, and I'll be off a little bit here because I don't have them in front of me, but I believe about $80 million of that tax relief would go to out-of-state residents. So what we did, we're looking at a different proposal that we have about $211 million worth of tax credits that was passed last biennium. Now embedded in the plan that we're looking at is $265 million worth of tax credits. So the argument would be, is this where that would come from? There's different places that it could come from. It could come from the SIF fund, the Strategic Investment Fund. It could come from the general fund. It could come from legacy. So those are the things that are being discussed right now. And so the tax relief, those income tax, property tax, those are the two things that are being discussed now.
But some of that tax relief does go to organizations, companies, different forms, or is it mostly people oriented like that?
Okay, there's one more point I wanted to make in the tax credits that we're talking about. I left out a point. By providing those tax credits, you're providing tax credits to North Dakota residents only, so that lowers the amount of income tax reduction for out-of-state. But they're both components. There's people are arguing for the commercial aspect, arguing for the residential aspect. So I don't think we've come to a consensus at this point, but
That's in the mix.
It's in the mix, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. All right.
Certainly have more question and answer coming later, and when we do, I will bring you a microphone. But thank you, Representative Lefor, for being willing to speak on Senator Kreidt's topic. Next up, had I known the Murtha family was bringing their children, I would have also brought more donuts. You may run out. Nevertheless, we're glad to have Jan Murtha with us. I'll load your presentation. Jan Murtha, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Carter. It's a pleasure to be here before you today. I want to start by thanking Rich Wardner, who invited me to speak today, and I've had the privilege of working with Mr. Wardner over the last several years, and he's been a wonderful leader and a great supporter of the office. I also want to thank Majority Leader Lefor as well. He's been a wonderful leader. So I said, well, when Rich asked me to be here today, I said, just so you know, we miss you, but at least we swapped the Majority Leader for the Senate for the Majority Leader for the House out in Dickinson. So we appreciate that. For those of you who might not know me personally, my name's Jan Murtha, obviously. I live in Dickinson, but I work in Bismarck. I remote here a couple days a week, but most of the time I'm on the road driving to Bismarck because that's where the state agency is that I represent. And when I'm talking to you about that agency today and what we do, I may sound a little passionate about it. And the reason is, I have to tell you, I'm not from here, but my husband is, and he is a fourth generation Dickinson family, and he's the one that convinced me that North Dakota is the best place to live, work, and raise a family, and it absolutely is. So I'm just so excited to be here and be able to speak in the community in which we live, because most of the time when I'm speaking in Bismarck, so it's great to speak here and have my family here today. If we could move to the next slide. What I want to talk to you about our little agency is who we are, what we do, how we do it, and why it's important. And the why it's important is going to flow through these the who, the what, and the how, because it's really something that I think we all can care about. The work that we do, we're doing on behalf of all of North Dakota, and I want to highlight that. So if we can move on to the next slide. Who we are. Well, this part, it's a little confusing. It's a little convoluted, by the way. But the who we are a very small agency that supports two very important programs. So we are an agency, so it's an agency of acronyms. I just want to start with that, right? So we're the Retirement Investment Office, which we call RIO. And we support the State Investment Board program and the Teachers Fund for Retirement program. So we support two programs. And how that came to be was actually back in 1989, the legislature took a look around and wanted to be efficient with things. And they said, okay, hey, you're kind of small and you're kind of small. And we think you guys can work together. We're going to save on rent. We're going to save on support staff. So this was just an idea. And from that, RIO was born and has grown. And today the focus is going to be on the State Investment Board program, but I do want to touch on the Teachers Fund for Retirement program because it is an equally important program. It is the retirement program for our K through 12 educators in the state of North Dakota. So it's one of our 28 client funds that the State Investment Board manages, but we also do the administration of benefits side at RIO as well. So it's our retirement, so the teachers at the schools where your kids go, we're taking care of their retirement income, really important program. On the other side, and that's what we're here to talk about today, is the State Investment Board program. And currently, the AUM's a bit higher now because we just posted our November numbers, but we currently have about $18 billion in assets under management. A lot of times I get this question. I get the question, okay, so you're the State Investment Board program. That means you invest on behalf of the whole state of North Dakota. We invest on behalf of a lot of funds in the state of North Dakota, but we don't invest on behalf of all of them. There's other investment programs. For example, the university and school lands. They have a separate investment program for the land trust, so that's over there. The state treasurer does stuff with money too. The Bank of North Dakota does as well, Commerce Department, but we're one of the state agencies, and we have one of, or perhaps the largest, assets under management at just over $18 billion. And we support these two programs with about 27 people right now, divided between those two programs, pretty much equally. So if we move on to the next slide, what does the State Investment Board do? Well, it has the statutory responsibility to invest a list of funds, including several pension funds, including the Legacy Fund. Actually, the interesting fact, the Legacy Fund investment authority comes from the state constitution. So when that constitutional amendment was passed to create the Legacy Fund, in the Constitution it says the State Investment Board shall invest. So that's where the authority comes from. Again, We have 28 client funds, so there's a statutory list of funds that have to use us as their investment manager. There's also the ability for any political subdivision, governmental entity in the state of North Dakota to contract with us to invest their funds. And there are several that do. In fact, that's the majority of our clients are contracted funds that reach out. Now, why would you have, I guess a common question would be, why would you have governmental entities utilizing the State Investment Board resources to invest their funds? We do it so cheap, I have to tell you. It's so inexpensive because we're not in it for profit, right? We're not trying to make money on the money. We are a governmental entity, so we're just charging our clients costs in order to administer this investment program on their behalf. So that's why it's an advantage for the state to be able to do this internally. So of the funds that we have, they're broken out into different categories. There's the pension pool, which has 7 different public pension funds in there. In there is TFFR, the Teachers Fund for Retirement. In there is also the PERS program, which that PERS covers several different subdivisions of retirement programs. So there's the law enforcement, there's highway patrol, there's judges, and then there's the PERS main plan, which is a big topic of conversation this legislative session because of its funding status. And I do feel the need to point out, not because of its investment earnings. We invest it really, really well, right? It's because of the contribution side of the equation. And then, of course, there's the legacy fund, and we did just post our November numbers, and so you can go on our website and see this, but currently it's just, it's rounded up here, but it's just, and I'll get on another slide, it's approximately $8.6 billion right now. And the prior month in October when we posted those numbers, it was just over $8.1 billion. So it's continuing. The market is starting to get a little bit better now. We're seeing that, and that's great news. And then, of course, there's some miscellaneous other funds down there that we invest on. And the insurance pool is WSI. That's one of our biggest contributors in the insurance pool. So just again, highlighting the variety of funds that we invest on behalf of the state. If we can go to the next slide. This is sort of one of those why it's important things to note. So within the pension pool, as I mentioned, we have 7 different pension funds. Currently, that pool is approximately $7 billion. What does that represent? Well, as of the last census in 2022, we had just shy of 800,000 people in the state of North Dakota. Those assets are being invested across those 7 pension pools on behalf of more than 80,000 active and retired members and beneficiaries. That means we're responsible for investing the retirement income or the retirement for approximately 10% of North Dakota families in the state. And when people retire, most of the retirees in these plans, they stay in the state. So the vast majority of them do. And so the retirement income that they're getting from their plans, because we're investing it and investing it well, that's money that's staying in the state too. And so that's why what we're doing is really important. And we get up every day, every member of our team gets up every day and knows that we are contributing in a meaningful way to North Dakota, to the security and stability of the people and of the state, and contributing, which I'll get into in a few more slides here, to its growth. And it's really exciting right now for us. We have a great group of people. We're very mission focused, and every day we get to know that what we're doing helps North Dakota, and that's just so exciting for us. Next slide, please. So legacy fund, a little bit of background, and Majority Leader Lefor mentioned this, but what happened? In 2009, the Legislative Assembly passed House Concurrent Resolution number 3054, which placed the question of creating the legacy fund on the 2010 general election ballot. North Dakota voters approved the measure, which created a perpetual source of state revenue from the finite natural resources of oil and natural gas. This legacy fund was created and put into the North Dakota Constitution. It's hard to get stuff in the Constitution, right? So it's really important it's in there. This was an excerpt from the legislative history on that House concurrent resolution. So if you go in there, it's just an interesting excerpt, and I've got the sites in the presentation if you want to look it up. Why? The question is, why create this fund? Answer: to save a part of the non-renewable resource to share the wealth with future generations. That's future generations in the state. So a great mission to start, but that mission continues to evolve, and that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit more here. If you go to the next slide. So legacy fund value, again, as of November, and you might be wondering, hey, Jan, why do you keep talking about November numbers? It's 2023 now, it's January. The reason for that is our processes. It's actually an area of improvement that we're trying to get on, but we can't reconcile data for until about 6 weeks afterwards. So there's a delay in our ability to report. We have a very small staff. We're limited by our infrastructure, our technology. It's areas that we're trying to improve on so that we can get daily reporting and that reconciliation. We actually got additional resources during the special legislative session to add to our investment team. And again, thank you, Rich Wardner, for that. That was very helpful. But one of the things we're going to try to do is get more quickly reporting data. But that's the reason it's the delay. We have to go through a reconciliation process across all of our investment managers with our custodian bank to make sure that the numbers that we have are absolutely correct. That then just gets reviewed by an independent consultant on the outside to again verify those numbers are correct, and then after all of that, then it gets posted to the website. So there's quite the review process and fact checking that goes in before we provide performance reports. So legacy fund value to date as of 11/30 was 8.5 or around 8.581, so approximately 8.6 billion. Inception to date net income. What do I mean by that? What's the net income? The net income is net of fees. So all the money that we spend to external investment managers to invest the legacy fund on our behalf, this is after that, the income after that. So 2.6 billion after that. Earnings transfers to the general fund. I should have put a note on here, and I apologize I didn't. These reflect the earnings transfers over the last 2 bienniums, so just the last 2 bienniums, approximately 1.3 billion. And as you saw from Majority Leader Lefor's slide, when he broke it down, there can be a big difference in the earnings that were transferred. So it was over 800 million this last time, and before that, it was about 400 million. So there's a big discrepancy, and the reason that is because of the definition of earnings. It can fluctuate greatly, and in fact, we won't know what that earnings number is until May of 2023 that we're going to be able to transfer because of that. There is some legislation this session, actually, that is being proposed to modify the definition of earnings to make it more consistent, reliable, predictable, and that we believe would help. I mean, we are supporting that definition, using that PMOV value as a definition, so that it enables a state to plan better. You can smooth the amount out and more consistently plan for those earnings and how to use them. So just so you know that if it passes, that number might be smoother in future years. Next slide, please. So here's where we talk about that evolving mission of the Legacy Fund. It's really exciting. People are really excited about it. And there was I'm going to tell you, there's a recent example of how it worked that I think everybody knows about and can appreciate. So what happened in the last legislative session? A lot of important pieces of legislation went through. And one of them was House Bill 1425 from the last legislative session. What did it do? It developed a preference program for in-state managers. So it said, hey, if all things being equal, we want you to give the nod for investment of the Legacy Fund for this in-state investment program to an in-state manager, somebody who works here, somebody who operates business here instead of using managers outside the state. We still use managers outside the state. This is just, again, all things being equal, we're going to give a preference to our in-state manager. So that was an important component of it. The other thing that it did was say, okay, 20% of this legacy fund, we're going to break it out into 2 categories that we want you to focus on investing in the state. 10% fixed income, 10% equity. Interesting thing about equity, this is the example that we often give. Interesting thing about equity, that's when we think of equity, oftentimes we think of the stuff that we can buy out in the market, right? I'm going to go buy some Google stocks. That's equity. I'm going to buy stocks in Coca-Cola. That's equity. But that's public equity. That's the buying and selling of public equity. Well, there's not a lot of public equity options in North Dakota. In fact, there's only one. So when this legislation was passed, it was very clear that the intent was to invest more in private equity. Well, what's private equity? Private equity is investing in business that aren't being exchanged on the market. You can't just go on there and buy stocks of them because they're not out there. Private equity involves a lot of due diligence. It involves a lot of investigation because your capital is locked up for 5 to 10 years before you're going to see a return on it. But that's what's available in North Dakota is private equity opportunities. And with me here today, and I just want, actually, Cody, could you just stand up and wave really quick? Thank you. With me here today is Cody First, also from Dickinson, I want to say, but she is a representative of 50 South. 50 South is our equity manager for the in-state investment program on the equity side of things. So when I'm done or at the end of this presentation, if you have any questions about the equity side of the in-state investment program, Cody's here and can answer them. And she can tell you all about the things that 50 South has been able to do in North Dakota to date. And it's a lot. And it's really exciting what's happening in North Dakota in just the last 2 years. It's fantastic. So again, the remainder of the equity program is likely going to be invested in private markets, given that limited public equity opportunities in the state. They're just not here, but we need to invest in the state, so it's going to be private. 10% fixed income. Part of this equation was creating an infrastructure revolving loan fund with a set 1.5% return. I will say that to date, there hasn't been a public entity that has utilized the infrastructure revolving loan fund. It's a great idea. I think actually what it says is that there's so many resources for our public entities in North Dakota that they have been able to utilize those other resources. So I think that the fact that that revolving loan fund hasn't yet been moved or been used reflects the fact that we're taking care of our local government in North Dakota. So that should be applauded. The next thing down here, we have the 60% B&D match loan program with yields equivalent to comparable treasuries. I won't go into that part. I just want to tell you, Bank of North Dakota is a wonderful institution. If you don't know this, North Dakota is the only state in the United States with a state-owned bank. It's very, very unique. And they have a B&D match loan program, and that fills our fixed income side. And if you're wondering how is that used, well, there was just a wonderful article in the Fargo Forum this last week, Tuesday, that talked about how legacy fund dollars were used in the B&D match loan program to save Coal Creek Station. So if you want to see how, if 1425 had any effect, I believe the bill sponsor and many other people said if the only thing that came out of this bill was that, then that was a win. And it's sure not the only thing that came out of that bill. So huge success in really a program that got up and running in the last 18 months. If we go to the next slide, I really want to talk about this, and because I don't think that this is being discussed enough out in the public. And part of that is us. We need to get out there and tell you this more. But as of right now, in dollars, just in dollars, with almost $300 million committed, North Dakota has one of the largest in-state investment programs in the United States, just in terms of dollars. If you're looking in terms of population and GDP, we are far and away the largest, far and away, if you're comparing it that way. But just in terms of dollars, one of the largest after only less than 2 years. Very, very impressive. So if there's a question about did this program get rolled out, it sure did. Is it successful? It sure is. Look at that and how we're stacking up with other states. But we're not stopping there, because we don't just want to build this program and say, it's good enough. We want this program to be a model in-state investment program so that other states in the U.S. look to North Dakota and say, we want to do what they're doing. North Dakota got it right with a sovereign wealth fund, an in-state investment program, and a state-owned bank. North Dakota is uniquely situated to succeed in growing its economy in a far more successful way than any other state in the U.S. It is a very exciting time in the state right now. Because of this. There's a lot of opportunities that our legislature gave to us with this legislation and what's happening here, and they really need to be applauded, and the people in North Dakota need to be applauded for setting up the Sovereign Wealth Fund, for setting up the Legacy Fund, because it is going to provide for the state for years to come. So over here, what I wanted to do with this slide is recap some of the important pieces of legislation that happened in 2021 that is now being discussed more this session. So sort of where are we at with what they did last session, and where are we going this session? So again, we had 1425. Successful. What's happening right now with that? The Legacy and Budget Stabilization Fund Advisory Board. That is a really, really long acronym, and I trip up every once in a while when I say it. But this is our client fund for purposes of the advisory board. So the way the State Investment Board works is all of our 28 different client funds, they all have a governing board that tell us how they want stuff invested. They set their asset allocation, and for purposes of the Legacy Fund, there was created an advisory board, and this is the body that's responsible for setting the asset allocation. That body, that advisory board, is comprised of both legislators and appointed and elected officials on the advisory board. So for example, you have several legislators on there. You also have the state treasurer, the insurance commissioner, the tax commissioner, the bank president at B&D, among others. So that is the group of people that sets that asset allocation. They have been working over the last year on an legacy fund asset allocation project. And the whole goal of that project is to figure out what is the best way to do this in-state investment program. The last thing they did in December was approve an updated investment policy statement that guides how we do investments. The next thing they're going to do is update the asset allocation. That's going to be this spring. And then a pacing schedule. Because and when I say pacing schedule, I want to give it to you in these terms. So a prudent investor, we have to diversify our assets, and what that means is you don't have all your eggs in one basket, right? So you have your eggs in different baskets, and for us that means you have your eggs in baskets in North Dakota, you have your eggs in baskets in the United States, and you have your eggs in baskets around the world, because when you're that big and investing that many billions of dollars, you have to do it that way, because if a basket gets tipped over in one place, you still got all these other baskets working for you. So that's how you mitigate your risk, right? Well, pacing refers to this idea that you also don't have all your baskets filled in 1 year. You fill some baskets this year and you fill some baskets next year, because next year might be a better year for that type of egg. And then you fill your baskets the year after that. And so that's how you diversify across the year. So when you have this much capital, you have to roll it out by putting it in different baskets at a measured pace. And you don't dump it all into the market in year one, because the market can't handle that. North Dakota economy can't handle all of this coming in right now. It's already actually coming in at a quite accelerated pace, but we have to pace it out. And that's what the advisory board is figuring out with their consultant, not with us, but with a consultant they retained. What's the appropriate pacing for North Dakota? On that point, I just want to make a note and highlight this. I know sometimes there's a question, why do we invest outside of the state? Why do we invest outside of the country? That's that question about diversification. That's what we have to do to be responsible. But I do want to make a note. Some people say, hey, but we don't like that you're invested in China. China is part of an emerging market index, so if you're an institutional investor and you're investing in emerging markets, which they do and we do, then China is part of that index. It is a component of it. So to not invest in China at this point in time would be to not invest in a prudent manner in accordance with that index. That being said, investments in China represent only about 1% of our assets under management, and we have far more actual dollars invested in the state of North Dakota than we do in the entire country of China. So if you want to look at it in terms of per capita, our investment in the people of this state far, far exceeds our investment in that country. So I just want to highlight that for you, and hopefully if anybody has any concerns, I'd be able to respond to them. But I think that's important to know. On 1380, the streams bill, I won't reiterate, because Majority Leader Lefor did such a wonderful job talking about the streams. It is under consideration again, and that is just the legislature looking at what do we do with these legacy fund earnings? Where do they go? What buckets do we want to put them in? How are we going to spend them? And so the legislation 1380 went in, was a great spending rule for this. And now they're looking at what do we need to rethink it? Do we need to add? Do we need to enhance? Take away? What should be done? Senate Bill 2291. This is another really important thing that I want to highlight here. What Senate Bill 2291 did last legislative session was put into law something that we were already doing. It prohibits social investing or divestment of funds for purposes other than the exclusive benefit of the beneficiaries. What does that mean? What am I trying to say with that? Well, social investment is when your goal is something other than making decisions and making money for our client funds. Some other goal. So oftentimes people say environmental, social, governance. They use these terms, ESG. When that's a goal, as opposed to part of the analysis, but an end goal, we want to achieve this goal, that's not for the exclusive benefit of our client funds. Then we're not investing in accordance with that, right? So we were already not considering those factors. I just want to be clear on that. Part of our review process was always to invest just for the exclusive benefit of our client funds. But this law codified it. And now we're able to point to our investment managers point to this law and said, remember, this law is on the books now, and for sure, we need you to confirm that you're not doing things on our behalf that is for any reason other than the exclusive benefit, and you're not of our client funds, and you're not taking these other things into consideration. And every one of them confirm as part of our compliance process. We review them, we talk with them, we confirm that. I need to say, and I feel very compelled to say this now, that North Dakota was a leader in passing 2291. You might hear in the news about other states passing ESG legislation. The type of legislation that other states are looking at passing are to get to where North Dakota already got to last legislative session. So again, our legislature should be applauded for doing that and being proactive about it because we are ahead of the curve. So if there is any discussion about, hey, what are we doing about this? It was already done. And it was a great move by our legislature. So we were ahead. We were a leader, and other states are now following what North Dakota did. So how do we monitor that? How do we ensure this is happening? SESIB client funds are managed by external managers. We don't have any internal investment authority thus far. We'd like to because we believe it could save the state millions, and we got a proposal before the legislature this session actually on that. But currently, it's all externally managed. RIO staff meets with each manager biannually and confirms all the funds are being managed for the exclusive benefit of client funds by maximizing total return for a prudent level of risk as set by a defined benchmark. It's a lot of institutional investing industry terms there, but the result is, are we doing what's in the best interest of our clients, only for our clients, and not thinking about anything else? And the answer is yes, and we're confirming that. Managers are instructed to vote proxies to maintain or improve shareholder value for the exclusive benefit of the client funds. So just when we give them money and they're having to make decisions and cast other votes, we are monitoring what they're doing to make sure that they're voting in a manner that is consistent with the objectives that we have set for them and nothing else, that they're not allowing any other interest to influence that. So with that, I believe, this might be my last slide here, I just want to end and conclude this presentation by letting you know, what are we doing? How are we investing in and for North Dakota? We're investing for the exclusive benefit of our client funds. We are investing for the security and stability of North Dakota, and we are investing to support economic growth in North Dakota. It is a privilege and an honor to do so, and I really appreciate your time this morning. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or wait to answer any questions until later.
On a day when our panel is a little smaller in numbers, it allowed us to dive a little deeper on a topic. So thank you, Jan, and thank you also from the chamber for the soundbite, Dickinson's the best place to raise a family. We're going to be looking to use that in the future. We'll bring back Representative Mike Lefor.
So I met the Murtha children, and one of them came up to me and said, "Are you the president of this whole thing?" Yeah. And I said, "No, I'm not." But she said, "Where's the donuts?" So, you know, Mom's famous now. So are you. Okay, next slide. So these are some of the things, and I've got some additional information that that we're working on. But one of the things in leadership discussions between the House and the Senate is a state employee equity adjustment. Now, the Department of OMB has done a significant study on compensation for state employees. And as we look back, state employees have gotten an 8% raise over the last 6 years. That's 1.3%. That can't go on like that. So the equity adjustment would work like this. The governor's proposal is $90 million to go into this market adjustment, which would bring people up into their pay scale to be competitive in the future. It would be allocated to OMB, which would then, there's a certain dollar amount for each department within state government to utilize, instead of just saying, hey, you're going to get percentage increase, this position is this much, this position is this much. So it's to be competitive in the market and give the state employees the recognition and the dollars that they have earned over the past several years. Raises, the governor has put in, again, the $90 million and a 6% and a 4%. I support that. I do think you will see that there'll be a budget filler for the short term, meaning like a 4 and 4, which is a placeholder. We're waiting until the market forecast. You have Moody's one day and S&P Global the next day talking about what they see in the next couple of years, which would then give us a little bit more comfort as to making sure that we're on the right track and before we do some of these things. The health insurance, it's a 15% increase in premium. I know we'll do that. Tax relief, because of a question earlier, I've kind of gone through that, but there's a group of about 8 of us that have gotten in depth with this, trying to figure out where we want to go to attract people to the state of North Dakota. What should our income tax rate be? What should our property tax be? And then you talk about what they do in surrounding states. But one of the key issues is how do you do these things to spur our economy? So we're blessed with a great financial position, and there's a lot of us that believe that this is the people's money and we need to be returning that to you. So I'm going to tell you that my best guess at this point is there'll be a property tax component and there'll be an income tax component. The governor really does not like property tax relief, and he's certainly not shy about saying that, but we're also not shy about saying we think that needs to be part of the discussion. So the PERS retirement system is something that's been very concerning to me over the last several years. And this is the main retirement system. It's not TFFR, it's not the Highway Patrol, it's the main retirement system. In the year 2000, you see we had $1 billion worth of assets, $879 million worth of liabilities. If you see at the top, all statistics are actuarial in nature, and actuarial is different than actual. Actuarial is projections, and what's the average person going to, how long is the person going to live? What's the salary going to be 10 years from now? So a lot of assumptions, a lot of projections. So in 2000, you see we were overfunded. Great position to be in, because then there's things you can do. You can provide COLAs, different things you could have done. But just 5 years later, we went from $130 million excess to $123 million liability, which, 90.8% in a pension plan is still pretty good. But then you look at how much it's grown in the last 20 plus years to be at 73%, 68%, 67%, and now under 65%. So the percentage that we have, we're battling Hawaii for the worst of the country. And I'm a firm believer that there's different things we need to do. Number one, in my opinion, close the defined benefit plan. Because you see the liabilities continue to grow and grow and grow. The liability is already here. No matter what we do, the liability is already here. But if we can close this plan and focus on something called ADEC funding, which I think we can, let's go to the next slide. The ADEC formula, actuarially determined employer contribution. What is the state of North Dakota responsible for? So in this, you'll see, number one, the employer contribution and employee contribution portion paid by the state for the defined benefit plan. So right now, the state pays between 7 and 8% of the employer contribution and 4% of the employee contribution on the defined benefit. The number two, the employee contribution paid for the new defined contribution plan. And people will say, you'll read that, well, only 3% of the employees of the state of North Dakota have opted for defined contribution plan. That's right, because a defined contribution plan currently is not very good. So that's why we engaged TIAA, Milliman Group, and the Reason Foundation. Let's have a defined contribution plan that is a Cadillac, that we can utilize to recruit and retain people. So the third component of ADEC, and this can be argued, can you do it in 25 years? Can you do it in 30 years? Yes. A 20-year plan to pay off the current unfunded liability. So in the bill, it's got $240 million for one-time cash contribution. It was $250, we took it to $240. And the reason we did that is because starting January 1st, 2024, we're requiring 1% additional employer contribution from the state and from the political subdivisions. So this is a benefit to our employees. And in the Legacy Streams bill that I brought forward last time, and I showed you prior, it's got $48.2 million in that. So if we're successful in pushing this across the finish line, that'll be $300 million that will go into the PERS retirement system. And the last time the legislature put dollars in was 1978, $14 million. There's a lot of us that are pushing because this is an issue that we need to address now. It could be like Social Security, it could be like Medicare. We can kick the can down the road because that's easy. The difficult part is having the discussion to take care of this once and for all. So in a pension plan, what should have been done is all three of those components since day one. So once it dipped below 90%, there should have been a strategy to put paying for a portion of the unfunded liability. But back then, who knew? 90% is a good number. 65% is unsustainable. The Legacy Streams bill currently being looked at has $70 million in there for continuing to put to the PERS fund every 2 years. But the paying for the unfunded liability will cost about $100 million a year. So over 20 years, we hope to have that paid. But if we put in $300 million now, and we get a 6% rate of return every year, that's $18 million more without compounding that's going into that. 50% of the dollars in the PERS retirement plan comes from employee contributions. The other 50% comes from earnings. So the more dollars that we can put in there, and we cross our fingers and hope the stock market will do its job for us, that will fill faster. And then you would hope that there is a time and a place where that's going to hit the top or the peak, and then the costs are going to start going down. Next slide, please. Okay, so supporting data. There's a lot of times when you have a discussion, an argument, what have you, about different issues. And then the hype starts to come into the mix. I'm saying let's just focus on the data. What is the data telling us? If you look at bullet point 1, in the past 3 years, the state has had a turnover rate of 38%. Well, that's compensation. Would be my number one, I guess. In 2016, the millennial generation became the largest in the workforce at 35%. By 2025, millennials and younger, Gen Z, will make up 75% of the workforce. They don't care about the defined benefit plan. I can provide information until I'm blue in the face on that. 86% of individuals 35 years old and younger want the defined contribution. They want portability in the retirement plan because they go from job to job to job. A DC does that, a DB doesn't. So at the bottom, it's predicted these individuals will hold many different jobs by age 38. They look at these jobs as projects. Good. Continuing supporting data. From 2019 to 2022, the number of individuals who worked remotely has skyrocketed. We know the pandemic played a very big part of that. But even as workers struggle to maintain workforce and give employees more options, additionally, many are in a hybrid status. They work at home, they work at the office, a combination of the two. Working on site has dropped. And this is a quote from a human resources leader for the state of North Dakota. When we capture early talent at Team ND at less than 30 years of age, we're not keeping them. And I would even say age 35, because at 5 years, we're losing half of our workforce. Next slide, please. So the executive branch has visited with every department within the state of North Dakota, whether it was an elected agency or an executive agency. And what did they want? Increased compensation to compete in the marketplace. We have to lower the rate of turnover within the state of North Dakota. Offer more training opportunities, professional development. Their well-being, work from home or the office. And people say, well, they're state employees, they're taxpayers, they should be at work. Well, the public sector isn't any different than the private sector. We're competing for workforce. We need someone there to do the job. And if someone in the private sector is saying you can work from home, you can work from home and at the office, where are they going to pick? So with the workforce and 40,000 open jobs, we've got to be smarter about how we approach this. Benefits, health care, vacation, and retirement. With all of that information, and we talked with some of the best pension fund managers and experts in the world, the Millman Group, TIAA, and the Reason Foundation, running all kinds of assumptions for this interim retirement committee, which I served. We said, design a best practices defined contribution plan to be competitive in the marketplace. And that means we want to recruit you to come to work for the state of North Dakota, and we want you to stay working for the state of North Dakota. How do we successfully exit the defined benefit plan? What do we need to invest in a defined contribution plan as a percentage of best practices? Well, what I said before, in the defined benefit plan, the state pays for the employer contribution share and a portion of the employee contribution share. Going over to defined contribution, let's say we're 30 years old. And you know what? I want the compensation. I don't want any money going to my retirement fund because I want to buy that shiny new car. Just by signing up, just by becoming an employee of the state of North Dakota, in the defined contribution plan, we'd pay 4% of your employer contribution and 4% of your employee contribution. So walking in the door, you get 8%. You don't have to put in a nickel. Now, if you want to increase that, the state will match you up to 7%. So by putting in 3%, you now get 14%. How many private sector 401ks do that? It's competitive. So everything that we do, we want to make sure that it's competitive so that you stay working for the state of North Dakota. Number 3, what amount of time should be given to allow for an orderly transition? And the committee ultimately decided January 1st, 2025. So any new hires after that would automatically be enrolled in the new best practices defined contribution plan. And what are all the potential costs associated moving from a DB to a DC plan? So as I said before, the estimates are $100 million a year, and we'd be putting in $300 million if this legislation goes through, so we more than take care of the first 2 years of the plan. After that, within the legislation, in 25-27 biennium, the legislation states that the state of North Dakota has to fund all 3 components of the ADEC funding, and that includes the ongoing paying off of the unfunded liability going forward. That is something that I am firmly supportive of, because the defined benefit plan, we promised this to our employees. They've done the job. We need to make sure that every employee gets their check until the last check. Last retiree draws their last check. So I said after January 1, 2025, they'd be enrolled in a defined contribution plan, which has an in-plan annuity portion to it. So that's guaranteed income. A contribution rate of between 12 to 15% employee contributions. That statistic comes from TIAA, saying that it's a component of what it takes to have a best practices plan. So we're almost at the top end of that. Throughout their working careers, this contribution to Social Security participation should achieve adequate retirement security, including up to 70 to 100% of what they made during their employed years. And this comes from TIAA. Next slide. Okay, defined contribution. Again, this is part of the best practices. Provide 15 to 20 low-risk investments, including in-plan annuities and a default investment option that adjusts its glide path over time, which means that you're going to be invested in the stock market or bonds or what have you based on how old you are, if that's what you decide that you want to do. You control the dollars. In a defined benefit plan, you get a monthly income. With a defined contribution plan, you control those dollars at the end. Provide employees with advice and guidance education. That was something that I thought was extremely important. And that they are required, as a component of this, they'd be required to constantly educate the people that are in the defined contribution plan to make sure they're on the right path with professional advice. Okay. Any questions about the retirement plan? Jacob.
Jacob Oderman, District 39 resident, north of Belfield. The question I would have is, we have a almost $3 billion surplus right now. Mm-hmm. Why not take $1.8 billion of that and pay it off so in 2025 we don't have to worry about funding for this retirement plan going forward, 20 to 25 years like you had stated, instead of what sounds like a bunch of new spending we're going to use or create with that surplus?
That's a great question. I was actually asked that yesterday. What I'll tell you is that, as I said at the beginning, 50% of the revenue comes from earnings, 50% of the revenue from contributions. The idea would be that instead of paying that whole $1.8 billion, that we'd be paying half that. Reason being is that the earnings over, let's say, 15, 20 years would take a bigger portion, so the state of North Dakota wouldn't be paying as much. The earnings would be taking a bigger chunk of that. But yes, we could certainly do that, but I wouldn't advocate for that, because I think we can solve this with a 20-year plan that's been well thought out, and also has the component of having the earnings pay for a part of the bill and not the state of North Dakota paying for all of it. Yes, sir.
Is the legislature considering how this is going to impact private business, especially small businesses that can't compete with these? Are we just reversing this now, and they're going to start having to compete against all this? And how are they going to do it? Are you considering that as a concern?
Oh, absolutely. See, the thing is, then there's another workforce component that we're working on. How do you bring people into the state? Because you can use all the statistics that you like. We have about 30 to 40,000 open jobs. We don't have enough people to fill them. The other component to the workforce for the private sector is, how do we, with the dollars that we have, recruit people to move to the state of North Dakota? We have to steal people from other states. There's no doubt about it. That's the only way. And other states are stepping up their game as well in tax relief and all these other things to make themselves more attractive to move to those states. So yes, we're concerned about the private sector as well. I've taken a lot of trips around the state. There's a company called Cardinal IG in Fargo, 350 some employees from 14 different countries. It's amazing. The president is a former Army Ranger. You can tell by the haircut. But he's very organized and speaks to his people very well. I met people from Somalia, Ethiopia, Iran. I mean, just all over the place, because they do a great job of recruiting people that don't live in this country. We've got to open up our doors to do things like that. So we talk about an immigration office. Let's have let's attract people from other countries to help with our workforce. Have them, they can be vetted and contribute a lot. There's a lot of people in Fargo now that are highly productive people in the private sector because they did some good recruiting in that area. The Fargo Chamber has a software program called Ignite, and that goes worldwide. They have the business profiles. We're working with the Department of Commerce, DPI, all those entities, higher education, to educate people and inform people that North Dakota is a great state to live in. So that private sector is also a concern, yes. Any other retirement questions? Yes, sir.
So Richard Medora, you hear me? Yep. Okay, Richard, District 39, Medora. So this is great education today, by the way. Thank you very much. This is incredible. And everyone who's here engaging, so glad you're here. We should be doing this. So who manages the investments of these funds? Just so I'm kind of clear.
Well, I believe
Okay.
There you go.
All right.
Sub.
The fiduciary.
Yeah.
The fiduciary. All right. Okay. That's cool. But if I understand correctly, the demand is outpacing the earnings. Is that
the liabilities?
The liability
are
on the fund,
outpacing
right,
our
outpacing
revenue, our
earnings.
assets. Yes.
Because of the contributions, the heavy contributions by the state.
Well,
Or of their contracts and that kind of thing. The dollars that aren't put in by the employee, rather by the employer.
when you look at a pension plan in whole, and you realize that you have to pay these retirees until they're no longer with us, there's a component in there that is earnings, and if the earnings don't keep pace with the liabilities, we should be paying that third component to fund the unfunded liabilities so you can have a strong pension plan. The state of Oklahoma did this about 10 years ago, and now they're almost fully funded. So that's what we're hoping to do. I'm hoping it doesn't take 20 years. I'm hoping that with a $300 million cash infusion and then another $200 million, the legislature has to pass this, but that's $500 million in the next 4 years. If that can get the earnings that we can, 6%, 7%, that's why you get half of the dollars would come from earnings, not from the taxpayer.
My name's Richard Benz. I'm from District 36. You've been talking about the ND PERS retirement plan. What about the teacher's retirement plan? Is that having the same issues? Is not being fully funded?
I think TFFR is in a lot better shape, but I'll let Jan.
I can comment on that. Thank you. Thank you, Majority Leader Lefor. Teachers Fund for Retirement is in great shape because of what the legislature did in 2011. So in 2011, the legislature, the members, the stakeholders all came together and said, okay, we need to address unfunded liability. What are we going to do? So they increased contributions. Again, I can't stress enough, the investment earnings are awesome. Just so you know, they are doing great. But they increased contributions and made some other plan design changes in 2011, and that put TFFR on the correct path. And so now TFFR is expected to reach fully funded status in 2044, which is really good. So their graphs, TFFR's graphs, look a lot different than PERS graphs because PERS didn't get that final contribution increase it needed to correct the funding path, right? So TFFR will get there. PERS right now is projected to never get there. And therein lies the difference. However, when TFFR gets there in 2044 or thereabouts, what will happen is the contributions increases that were agreed to in 2011 will go back down to the pre-2011 rates, so a lower rate for our employers, our teachers.
Great to have you here today, Jan.
Let's go next generation agriculture, and we'll come back to questions.
In April of last year, I visited with Representative Paul Thomas from Velva, and I said we need to get a work group together to talk about animal agriculture in North Dakota. And from that came about 6 or 7 House members, then a couple of state senators, the Ag Commissioner, the Governor's Office, Farmers Union was involved in the discussion, Farm Bureau, corn growers, all involved in this discussion. How do we grow animal agriculture in North Dakota? Period. And it wasn't until the President Farmers Union a few days ago in the newspaper was blasting Governor Burgum for the plan to move animal agriculture. Well, this wasn't Governor Burgum's plan. This was a legislative plan. And we shared it with him, and he supports it. A lot of work went into this. We have the most restrictive corporate farming law in the country. If you look at the data, again, just data and not, and I want to back up to PERS just one more time. We talked about how do we successfully provide a strong pension plan for state employees. Every group was invited to speak. Not until a few days ago did one throw a curveball saying it was going to cost $5.5 billion, this plan that we have. I don't know what planet they're on, because there's no basis in reality for that. And that information was never shared with us. So if you're going to have an open, genuine discussion about something, don't make it political, make it logical, let the data take you to where you need to be. North Dakota records this year. So cattle and calves in 1975, we had 2.6 million head of cattle. Now we have 1.9 million. Dairy cows, our peak was in 1934. 701,000 dairy cows, now 11,800. 2009 to 2017 to today, the number of dairy farms has gone from 193 to 105 to 37 farms. Hogs peaked in 1943. 1.1 million today. Today we have less than 150,000. And Farmers Union will tell you that this bill is an attack on farming. What we're trying to do is allow for people to get together as a group to start a business, start a dairy operation. Not everybody has Jacob Oderman's money. You have to go together to partner, just like you do any other private sector business. Next slide, please.
Somebody wants to give me some financial investment, I think.
Got it. So, local food production, population growth in rural areas. I believe it's Lewis and Clark County in South Dakota where one individual decided that we're going to grow animal agriculture in that county. Worked very hard on it, found partners. Now that school that was dying is now increasing in population. More people are moving to that area. 800 head of dairy, 1.4 million in local payroll with 22 to 24 full-time jobs. Representative Dawson Hawley is 19 years old. He's a dairy farmer. Said 800 head dairy employs 2 vets. $1.4 million in payroll. What we're talking about is 160 acres. You can put aside 160 acres for animal agriculture. This has nothing to do with wheat, corn, crops, nothing. It's animal agriculture. Economic impact to local communities and state, value added to grain farms. The governor told me that Ron Offit, who owns, I believe, like 10, 20,000 herd of cattle in Oregon and Texas, if we opened this up, he'd bring it here to North Dakota. We had a visit, one of our committee members had a visit with a farmer in Iowa. I was talking about the increasing cost of fertilizer, because the cost of fertilizer is absolutely shot through the roof. So are you concerned about the price of fertilizer? No, I'm not. Because of all the farms around here with all the animals they have, the manure is my fertilizer. And I've got a 5-year contract. So my price didn't go up at all. So we need to increase the opportunities for our farmers. If you grow corn, you can sell it to your neighbor. Right now we're selling it out of state. It's going to South Dakota, it's going to Minnesota. Why do we let that happen? Increased basis, price received for grain. Better utilization of land resources where marginal salty land can be used to grow hay, alfalfa, etc. Manures, recycled nutrients. Go ahead. This is Iowa. And I will admit my assistant put this together and I said, you really have to put that little pig up there. You really have to do it. 5,418 hog farms. Over 147,000 direct and indirect jobs. Think about that for a minute. 147,000 jobs. Hog production produced 47% of the jobs, because Iowa is huge on hog production. 14 commercial harvesting facilities created 45% of jobs. Commercial pork processing contributed the other 9%. The three pork industry sectors generated $40.8 billion in sales. Why doesn't Farmers Union think this is a good idea? Next, please. Spin-off industries from animal agriculture, construction materials, job building facilities, development of feed mills, animal health jobs, harvesting and processing. Our restaurant buys our beef from God, you're South 50, now I'm being confused. Thank you. In Mott. But they need rendering plants. They need feed. And our farmers can provide that. Next Generation Agriculture Act, soybean processing. Principal feed ingredients for swine, poultry, and dairy is soy meal, which is roughly 2/3 of the output of a soybean plant. Next. What does modern agriculture look like? We have diverse livestock populations. So they get into what does it smell like, look like, and things like that. When you talk about trying to grow an industry like animal agriculture, and I've talked to Representative Thomas about this, you put pegs in the ground, setting a foundation, doing all of these things, livestock-friendly counties. If you decide that you want to be a livestock-friendly county like they did in South Dakota, the state will provide matching dollars for infrastructure because you're going to have the roads utilized a heck of a lot more. So the state will partner with you to provide dollars for infrastructure. Next slide, please. So how does North Dakota benefit from livestock growth? Let's capture all the economic growth right here. The production of feed. Let's have rendering plants. Let's have fertilizer plants, because fertilizer is something that the pricing is out of control and it lowers the margins for farmers. Locally produced foods, jobs for North Dakota graduates. Let's keep them here.
Paul Johansson, right here in Dickinson. I know, not that I had any problem with the discussion you had on agriculture, but I was a little unclear. You did mention that, and we know nationwide there's problems with fewer and fewer companies that do mass, let's just say, butchering of animals. Mm-hmm. Is there anything in this policy to help encourage that other than we'll have more animals so they'll come?
Actually, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. So if you look at the Legacy Streams bill, there's a component in there for the exact thing that you're talking about. We have to incentivize people to move here, people to put capital together to want to move here. So yes, that is a component of the Animal Infrastructure Fund. So grants, loans, things like that. So good question.
Thank you. George Nodland, retired senator and retired banker. But just a little history. You're exactly right. When I started banking in the early 80s, I had 35 dairy farmers, customers. When I retired in 2006, I had 1. And at the same time, we had a cheese plant in Dickinson, we had a cheese plant in Lefor, we had a cheese plant in Beach, just some things. And yeah, it didn't hurt Dickinson because we had other industry, but all those small towns are dying. So it's important. And if you're concerned about a dairy and the smell, I live 1 mile from Karski Dairy, northeast of Dickinson. And they inject their fertilizer from their animals into the crop, into the ground, and it smells for 2 days. You can ask my wife, and then it's over. So the technology in agriculture has come a long way. So I know that I wish Senator Kessel was here because he could really help in that thing. But that's a great idea, you guys. Keep it going, and don't let one farm organization discourage you. It's a great idea. We're behind the 8 ball in agriculture, and we need to grow. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments, and it's also because we have, the good Lord has blessed us with a lot of resources, coal, oil, and that to the extent that a lot of other states don't have. But the best time and place to think about how to diversify our economy is when things are going well, so that in the future generations will have something for them too.
Jeff Fitzik, District 37. So I applaud what you're doing with this, and I think you're right on the money, Representative Lefor. But I was wondering if you guys were exploring some of the other aspects that have curtailed farming across the board over the time period from 75 to currently. And that's the amount of regulation that's been put upon the farming industry. You know, for over 20 years, North Dakota has not been a rural state by representation at the state legislature. And so city people have been making laws governing ranching, and sometimes inadvertently. The one call locate, 811 call before you dig would be a good example of that. There are exceptions in that law for agriculture. If you're a homeowner, you have to call before you plant a tree in your yard if you dig more than 12 inches. If you're in agriculture, it's 14. That's the only exception. Well, if anybody here in ranching puts a fence post in at only 14 inches, they're probably not ranching for very long. So they have to call one call locate by law for every time they change out a fence post. Anytime they change a fence, anything, or they're in violation. This is just one example of the myriad of regulations that have come to play on all of our agriculture. And so I was wondering if you guys would look at addressing some of those issues, which Farm Bureau and other groups have also presented issues on.
I'm a big believer in less regulation, the better. And I'd be happy to take a look at specific ideas that you might have to loosen that, making that less restrictive. Because the less restrictive we are, the more encouraging that we are to move people to the state of North Dakota, the better off we're all going to be. So I'm all for eliminating regulations, unless they're needed to protect the consumer or what have you. But less regulation is better, I believe. Yes.
I'll play the role of a coach looking to manage the clock in the fourth quarter of the game, okay? If you're looking to get in today by noon with a question on any topic, I'd like to see a hand in the air. I'll come to you with a card from the deck. That'll help me get to you by noon today, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, I just had a few more points that I wanted to make about what's happening that I didn't include in the slideshow. Career in Tech, as I said last week, the $69 million that we wanted to move forward with is going to be heard in Senate appropriations, so I'll be bringing that up in a presentation on Monday. I'm hopeful that they act on it fairly quickly and that we could have it to the governor's desk either by the end of the week or the following week so we can get those dollars released. And I think that, well, that affects about 13 projects in the state, and Dickinson, I believe, would get about $3.4 million of those dollars. In addition, the CTE board bill I brought forth that would allow private sector, higher ed, and private schools to be involved in the board membership is moving forward, I believe, with a positive vote. We'll see that very soon because the private sector has put in about $80 million when it comes to dollars, in kind, and things like that. And as I talked before, on animal agriculture, that's one I'm following very, very closely. Farmers Union has already come out against it. And, but again, it's a 160-acre limit, but you can get partners to form an S corporation or what have you to grow those type of businesses. The employee raises I talked about, tax relief. In the past, I think in the legislature, Senator Wardner on the Senate side would release all the first half bills to the House. The House has not responded in kind. As the House leader, I intend to do that, move bills over to the Senate faster so that we can have better, generative, detailed discussions about topics that are very important to the people of the state. So I intend to move that over to the Senate. Behavioral health, been working with Representative David Richter from Williston, who in my mind is a heck of an advocate for behavioral health. We will have, in Dickinson Public Schools will be part of this, a pilot program for support for school-based mental and behavioral health interventions. And some of the statistics that surround this are concerning. That approximately 9.4% of 3 to 17-year-old children were diagnosed with anxiety problems, and 31.5% of 13-year-old to 18-year-old children have experienced depression. Survey data that's been collected since 2009 related to the percentage of students who felt sad or hopeless, which is almost every day for 2 or more weeks in a row. The percentage reported by North Dakota students has gradually increased every year from 22.9% in 2009 to 36% in 2021. So again, the data is telling us something, and so that has been added on the Senate side, and I will do everything I can to make sure that stays on the House side as well. The 10-bed behavioral health, we're working to try and get that put on the Senate side, and that would be 10 behavioral health beds at the hospital here and in Williston. And if it doesn't go on the Senate side, I'm going to propose an amendment to put that on Human Services budget in the second half. But with that completes what I have brought forth today, and I'm certainly open to any questions.
I want to acknowledge that we also have Senator Dean Rummel in the room. Now he's off the hook, technically. We'll bring him back in February. If you feel moved to join the panel for any remaining questions, you can do so. But we're grateful that you're here today. We've got a question over here on this side of the room.
Hi, my question is for Representative Lefor. My name's Jack Gardner. I'm in District 37. I got a question on Senate Bill number 2151. Why are we giving if it passes, why are we giving loans of up to $160,000 to immigrants and refugees that won't have to pay it back within, it gets 10% every year reduction if they have a job or go to college? Why are we giving out these loans to people?
Jack, that's a great question. I don't think that's going to happen. I believe I did co-sponsor that bill, but I don't think that component's going to happen. So anytime you bring forth a bill, you bring it forth for discussion, for changes, for making it better. I believe what's going to happen, or I'm hopeful what is going to happen, is that we have a department within the state to help recruit immigrants to come to North Dakota, but I don't think that provision is a good one. So I'm hoping that gets amended out.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
The Unruh family got here early. There were 3. They had some time constraints, so I think it was Jack was left to read the question. Thank you for being here, Unruh family. Yep. Next question over here.
Sir, Matthew, right here in Dickinson. Kind of follow up from last meeting on your bill 1446 in reference to, I forget the term that you named it. I'm not sure if you want to do it now, but do you want to put out the updates to the bill from what the last?
I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to. And basically, I'm going to amend 4 portions of that bill, and basically it was because of conversation from here last week. A few different components, and I did talk about removing the part about social media, because everybody should have an opportunity to have their voice heard. Change the may to must, and that was your recommendation in terms of a written evaluation, that the state would indemnify the Board of Higher Education from lawsuits, and that there is an appeal process to the chancellor. And so there's the hearing is Friday, but I'm going to put ask those amendments to be moved onto the bill, because those were all good ideas, and I appreciate that. So hopefully that answers your question.
And just one last question, sir. I know this House bill, you're in favor of it, obviously. Have you ever had, or do you plan on having a meeting with tenured faculty to explain your reasoning behind the House bill?
I would be happy to. Now, I will say Professor Johansson did invite me. I think it was around the Thanksgiving area, and I was not available to attend, but yes, I would be happy to have that. In fact, I've gotten contacts from several DSU personnel who support this bill, and obviously some who do not. But yes, I'd be more than happy to have that discussion.
Colleen Cannon from Dickinson. I'm going to ask about the, first of all, I want to say thank you for stripping out the propaganda with the Gen Z.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't hear you.
So I want to thank you for stripping out the propaganda of the Gen Z, generation and all the kind of stereotypes that go with that. So the data that you put up there talking about them being going to be the largest generation in the employment field soon. It's good to have that, that information when we're having this conversation. So my question is, aside from stripping out with the benefits, the portability of the benefits, are there any other programs or legislation that you are putting in place to attract the Gen Z to North Dakota? And I'll say I have two children. One is in college here, one is in college in Texas, and I'd really like to know what you're looking to say, hey, come on back or stay in my state.
That's a great question. And that my answer would take more than 20 minutes. But here's what I'll tell you. There's a lot of different components that are at play here. Career and tech academies. Looking at adding more and more technology. I am going to have a bill which will also be widely discussed about that each high school in the state must have computer sciences as part of their curriculum. The career and tech academies, we're looking at the jobs of the future. So you look at even this career and tech academy we have here. What is the market? What are the jobs that are going to retain kids to come here? And I can tell when we got going on this, I've never gotten so excited about something in my life, except for my wedding day. So remember that. But in all seriousness, the amount of individuals from the private sector that wanted to get involved with this, auto mechanics, you need technology now to fix a car with all the electronic components to it. So you've got all the different car dealers in Dickinson. I won't start saying names, but and then you've got counties and you've got private sector. If you go get try to get a CDL degree through Career and Tech, I'll bet you don't have to pay a dime, because there's so many businesses willing to provide scholarships. But when working with the Department of Commerce and CTE and Chambers and DPI and higher education, they're all working together. I've had several meetings with a lot of these groups. How do we keep the kids that are here staying here, being motivated to work here? There's so many advantages to working in North Dakota. You have unlimited opportunity, in my opinion. Where else can you go to get paid the salaries that you can here for the cost of living here? So there's a lot of different programs that are in place, and I would, at some point, maybe next, if I'm here next week, I'll bring some of the workforce components that we're working on. The governor has provided some, but we also have a workforce group that is working on a lot of those topics. And it's exciting stuff, because the private market is starving to have our kids stay here and bring other kids, our other young people and adults from other states here. But I'd be happy to bring some of the elements of the workforce plan that we've got going. Maybe I'll bring that next week. If I think I'm off next week, I'd lose my perfect.
Well, do you want that perfect attendance certificate that we're talking
I know, it's a lot of pressure.
Talent attraction to the state, big topic. We touched on it today. We're doing 6 more of these sessions. I think we're going a different direction.
My question is about the ag bill. Any discussion or anything in the bill about land ownership by the federal government or private citizens that don't live in North Dakota?
Last part?
Discussion about land ownership by either the federal government or by private citizens that don't live in North Dakota. Such as Bill Gates.
Well, that's a great question, Judge. There are different bills circulating through the legislature that would limit foreign land ownership in North Dakota. So there are components of those bills, especially Chinese, Russian, things like that. So those are out there to be discussed right now. In terms of animal agriculture, we didn't really focus on that portion a lot. When you talk about Bill Gates bought land with current law, and they can form trusts and they can buy that land now. What we're focusing on is giving the ability for people to bind together and start businesses. Now, if that has a foreign component to it, I think we need to have that discussion. And maybe that bill will that's being brought forward. I just glanced at it one time, I think it's a couple of weeks ago, but they are targeting China for sure. And we are going to have some people visit with our caucus on the impact of foreign ownership in our state. So I'll remember that. I'll try to bring some more information back on that. Do you have to let that guy ask another question? Is there no?
Well, in fairness, it's not for me, it's for Mr. Unruh, who had to leave. So
that's fine.
It's in regards to a bill you didn't quite touch on today that you're a co-sponsor of, House Bill 1508, regarding audit fees for state institution, political subdivisions, and occupation and professional boards. So just wondering if you could fill that in a little bit more.
1508, I'm sorry. You're going to have to explain it to me again.
Okay. It reads, a bill to act or amend and reenact sections of several portions of 54 of the North Dakota Century Code relating to audit fees of state institutions, political subdivisions, and occupational and professional boards, and to provide for retroactive application. And the other sponsors were O'Brien, Nathy, Sanford, and Schreiber-Beck.
Yeah, and I've had a discussion with, and I'll have more discussion with the state auditor, but some of these entities, the Kildare Fire District was recently charged $48,000 for an audit by the state auditor. And others have had those type of situations as well. And at the end, he's looking at or the audit department is looking at a $2 million reserve at the end of this biennium. So there is concern out there about what the charges are for. So again, I co-sponsored that for the discussion. There was another bill sponsored by Representative Brandenburg that tackled how much is being charged to fire stations, other political subdivisions, but he withdrew that. So I think it's worth a discussion, and I intend to have a discussion with the state auditor hopefully sometime this week so that I can get better educated as to why these fees are being charged to that level. There might be a good reason for it, but I think that it's important to have the discussion.
Thank you. George Soror, Dickinson. What I wanted to know, this is regarding Bill 1446. First, I'd like to say thank you for your contributions for behavioral health. It is really important. So I'm an assistant professor of psychology at Dickinson State, by the way. So I appreciate your contributions regarding behavioral health. Regarding the 10-year bill, you had brought up a lot of things that are important, like recruiting and retaining people in our state. And in order to have a dynamic workforce in the state, we have to have an educated and well-trained workforce. And in order to have an educated and well-trained workforce, we need good educators. We need qualified educators. And we're having a difficult time recruiting people to this, recruiting people from in the state and outside of the state. And my question is, how does this bill contribute to workforce development in North Dakota? It seems to me it's going to exacerbate these problems.
How many tenured professors does the University of Mary have?
0.
Yeah, they're doing just fine. My son is a professor for the University of Mary at Arizona State. I believe for the future of higher education, and I don't think anyone can argue that I have not been a strong supporter of Dickinson State University. I believe for the future of this university and other universities, you're going to have to be very competitive to get students, to maintain quality faculty, but it's everybody has to be all on deck. The university has grown by several hundred students over the past several years, and that's because of administration. It's because of faculty. It's because of our professors. What are we afraid of? The bill does 11 things. It provides an opportunity to take a look at what is going to help move us forward. The simple fact of the matter is, we're going to go more and more to online. The education is changing. The mission of Dickinson State is changing more and more to dual mission. So how do we change what's happening with the data that we see in the future and make Dickinson State or other universities in our state more competitive to attract students? And so I'm a firm believer that it's all hands on deck. What's wrong with having accountability? Like I said, my son's a professor at the University of Mary. Part of his job is to recruit students. And you can say, well, that's not my job. Well, I'm gonna argue that how do you become successful then? If you don't have all hands on deck, if you don't have everybody involved in all those components, how are you going to be successful? And so University of Mary, I'll just hold up, has grown tremendously, and they don't have any tenured professors. So I think we just need to keep following in that. Professor Johansson.
I'm not sure, I do not know University of Mary, but I do know somebody that teaches at BYU in Hawaii. Some of these church-supported schools have things that are similar to tenure, but they don't use that word. They have certain guarantees. So just to say they don't have tenure doesn't entirely mean they don't have professors that have protections because they've been there a long period of time. So I think using the word tenure and saying UMary doesn't have tenure might be simplifying issues a bit.
We'll do this.
First of all, I guess I want to say one more thing. I strongly support the professors at Dickinson State. It may not seem like it, but I do. There's a reason that this university has grown. And well, that's right. And one more point that was just pointed out to me is that the University of Mary, they get a new contract every year. Every year they get a contract. Tenure, not tenure, whatever you want to call it, but they have to have a contract every year based on their job performance. But at the end of the day, I just am a firm believer that we have to have tenure with responsibilities attached to it. You just don't have tenure and you've got a lifetime appointment. Because some tenured professors, I would say the bulk of the tenured professors at Dickinson State, including the ones that have emailed me in the last week, are good people. But they want to see this too. So, thank you all for your time.
Two items from the chamber real quick. Remaining schedule next 6 weeks. Let's take a peek. We've got John Gottfried coming February 4th. And on from there, Randy Chrisman, February 11th, Josh Gallion, February 18th. We take a break. Topic is water, March 11th. Dr. Andrea, I'll learn her last name. Okay. Lieutenant Governor Tammy Miller confirmed March 18th. Lynn Helms, March 25th. One more chamber event coming up is our Southwest Night at the Legislature in Bismarck, February 13th. Our guests of honor, we're going to share a laugh with Rich Wardner and Kayleen on that evening. If you have goofy photos, old-time photos, yearbook stuff, material on the Wardners that's good for a laugh, I would love for you to send it to the Chamber team at dickinsonchamber.org. With that, have a great day, everyone. We'll see you next time.